Hey, guys. Tonight, we're diving into a world where the sound of clanking metal fills the air, and nights are about as comfortable as a sardine in a tin can, except, way more clanky. Picture it, you're in a grand, echoing castle hall, and you're about to walk through it in a suit of armor that's so heavy, it's like you've strapped a small car to your body. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry. It's not about surviving. It's about existing in the absurdity of it all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not share where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are? It's fun to imagine us all wandering these medieval halls together from different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the cold stone floor, and immediately you hear it, the unmistakable rhythmic clank of metal boots. Each step echoes louder than the last. The sound seems to follow you as you move deeper into the castle, your every movement a laborious effort. And it's not just the boots either. Your entire body feels encased in metal, as if you're wrapped in an iron shell. You're not sure what's heavier, the armor, or the weight of the expectations that come with it. The truth is, knights didn't really want to wear all this armor all the time. Historians still argue whether it was truly for protection, or if it was just a really over-the-top fashion statement. Sure, it protected them in battle. But most of the time, they were just strolling around wearing 60 pounds of dowel for no reason. Honestly, it sounds like going to brunch in a suit of kettlebells. But that's the medieval way, right? Always over-prepared whether they needed it or not. Can you imagine having to wear all this just to go to a feast? I mean, just think of trying to eat a roast turkey with a helmet on. Good luck. In fact, most knights probably spent more time trying to get their armor on and polished than they did actually fighting in it. It's hard to imagine what must have been going through their heads, maybe wishing they'd just stayed home with a nice, comfy tunic. Maybe even dreaming of a day when they could be free of the clank. And the best part, you haven't even gone upstairs to put your helmet on yet. You glance around the dimly lit hallway, and there's something almost surreal about this whole scene. The castle is vast, ancient, and unsettlingly silent, save for the ceaseless echo of your own footsteps. It's as though time has slowed down, and in this quiet moment you can feel the weight of the ages pressing in on you from every direction. The only thing moving is you encased in your shining armor. The clanking of your boots is now deafening, almost as if the stone walls themselves are mocking you. As you walk, you feel the weight of the metal pressing on your chest, your shoulders, your back. It's like carrying a pile of bricks, except it's not just on your back, it's everywhere. Every inch of your body is covered your joints, stiff and awkward. Your movements slow and deliberate. Every step feels like an achievement in itself. Is this really what the knights had to deal with? Yes, it was. And ironically, they probably spent more time walking around in this armor than they did in battle. The truth is, knights didn't just wear armor for show. They wore it for a whole host of reasons, most of which, when you stop and think about it, don't quite make sense. In battle, sure, armor was a lifesaver, until it wasn't. But when they weren't fighting, they spent hours upon hours donning this heavy, clunky gear, whether they were going into battle or heading to a royal feast. And for what? The reality was, most knights didn't actually see much combat. They were more likely to find themselves polishing their armor than swinging a sword. Imagine that polishing for hours, preparing for a fight that may never come. It's like spending your entire day getting ready for a barbecue, only to find out the grill is broken and the hot dogs have been eaten by the dog. Historians still argue whether the full suit of armor was designed for combat efficiency or if it was simply a means of showing off wealth and status. After all, medieval knights were often expected to be walking symbols of the ideal brave, powerful, rich, and totally incomprehensibly uncomfortable. Armor became something of a social uniform, a way to show that you could afford the best metalworking and finest craftsmanship available. Sure, it was useful in battle, but it was also a show, a performance, and a means of projecting strength. But honestly, what good is strength when you're so weighed down you can't even lift your own arm? Can you imagine trying to lift your sword in the middle of a battle while feeling like you're trapped in a suit of armor designed by a sadistic blacksmith? It's like trying to break into a dance routine wearing a full-body wetsuit. Awkward, heavy, and a little bit ridiculous. And even though knights would spend hours getting dressed, most of them probably never even saw combat. This entire process, getting dressed, polishing, adjusting, was just as much a part of their identity as their battle skills. You didn't want to look like you'd been caught in a rush job after all. As you walk deeper into the castle, you find yourself thinking about the helm. Ah, yes, the helmet. The final piece of the puzzle. You're almost there, but before we get to that, let's pause for a moment to admire the true art of the knightly headgear. Because, honestly, this part of the process is probably the most absurd. You see, knights didn't just wear helmets. They wore these massive metal contraptions that made them look less like warriors and more like overgrown metal-clad mushrooms. Imagine trying to see through the narrow slits of your helmet's visor. Where visibility is so limited, you might as well be blindfolded. If the suit wasn't heavy enough already, these helmets added an extra layer of difficulty, cutting off the majority of your senses. Hearing gone, breathing a challenge. It's like trying to wear an oversized colander on your head while running a marathon. It sounds ridiculous, but this was a Tuesday for Sir Gregory. And yet, despite this, knights still had to march out and look dignified, which, let's be honest, is probably the most noble part of the whole charade. Imagine having to stand there in your polished, pristine armor, ready to defend your honor in a battle, except you can barely see your opponent. You're staring out through tiny holes in the front of your helmet, squinting and hoping for the best. You're almost hoping your opponent doesn't notice that you're having difficulty moving in your suit, much less seeing them clearly. And then, when it's finally time to move, oh boy, you attempt to lift your arm, but it's like trying to raise a broomstick that's welded to your body. And that's not even the worst part. No, the worst part is trying to breathe in this thing. It's like wearing a metal can on your head, only it's hot, claustrophobic, and makes you feel like you're suffocating. You'll probably be panting and sweating in no time. But hey, that's a small price to pay for the privilege of looking impressive, right? You might wonder why anyone would put themselves through this. Well, historians still debate the true reason behind the design of these cumbersome helmets. Some suggest that they were primarily about intimidation, no better way to send a message than by showing up looking like a walking fortress. Others argue that the helmet was meant to protect against specific types of weapons, like arrows or swords aimed at the face. But one thing's for sure, the helm did nothing for comfort. In fact, it made everything worse. It's like wearing a Halloween mask made of steel and expecting to enjoy a nice dinner party. So, while you stand there in your own mental suit of armor, clanging and creaking every time you move, remember this: knights spent hours preparing for a battle they often never saw, and when they did, fight, their ability to move, let alone see, was severely limited. It's almost as if the whole knightly thing was more about looking the part than actually performing it. And you haven't even gotten to the worst part yet, the real kicker. You're about to sit down to a feast in this ridiculous gear. Imagine trying to eat a full roast chicken in a suit of metal that makes every movement feel like a small war. By now, you're probably starting to realize that knights didn't exactly have a leisurely lifestyle. You're trudging down this endless corridor, each step heavy, awkward and loud. The castle is eerily quiet, apart from the clang of your boots, and you begin to wonder how anyone could ever get used to this. It's not just the weight of the armor. It's the fact that you've been wearing this cumbersome ensemble for hours already. It starts to feel like your body is slowly turning into the very metal that encases you, and that's when it hits you, the helmet. Yes, this is the part where everything just becomes absurd. You've been walking for what feels like an eternity. Your body is weighed down by 60 pounds of armor. And now, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the final piece of the puzzle is about to make everything even more ridiculous. The helmet. You're not even sure how you're going to manage with it on your head. Can you imagine trying to fit your head into a thing that looks like it was designed by a blacksmith, with a sense of humor? A helmet that limits your vision to a small slit, blocks your hearing, and makes breathing feel like you're trying to suck air through a tiny straw. You can't see much of anything, but you know the people around you must be giving you curious looks as you try to move your head like a stiff metal mannequin. Historians still argue whether the design of medieval helmets was purely for protection, or if they were also meant to make the wearer look as imposing as possible. There were even helmets with massive faceplates or hoods that made knights look like they were walking tanks. The more intimidating the armor, the more likely you were to be feared, regardless of whether you could actually move well in it. It was all about creating a visual presence. You couldn't be a knight without your imposing vision-blocking helmet. And while we're at it, let's talk about hearing. Ever tried to focus on a conversation while wearing noise-canceling headphones? Now, imagine wearing a helmet so thick and tight that all you hear is muffled sounds. You'd probably be asking the person next to you to repeat themselves a few dozen times, just like a knight would have in the midst of battle. The sounds of the battlefield would be reduced to a distant, muffled hum, a low buzz of clanging swords, and the occasional scream. So while knights might have looked ready to take on the world, they probably didn't hear it too well, and certainly didn't see it with much clarity either. But the real kicker here is that knights were trained to wear these helmets and function in them. That's right. They'd practice. They'd spend hours getting used to the helmet's weight, its limited visibility, and the awkwardness that came with moving in it. Imagine someone telling you to get used to wearing a giant fishbowl on your head and do it gracefully. But that's exactly what knights had to do, not just to be good in battle, but to maintain their knightly image. If you couldn't wear your helmet like a pro, you'd be laughed off the battlefield. So wearing this clunky gear wasn't optional. It was a lifestyle. A strange, uncomfortable, and impractical lifestyle, but a lifestyle nonetheless. And yet, despite all this, there were times when knights would wear their full armor and helm, not for combat, but for what a parade. A feast. Yes, indeed. In fact, knights would attend royal gatherings in full regalia, marching down the halls of castles, complete with gleaming armor and visors locked into place, as though they were preparing for battle. Only instead of a battlefield, they were headed for a dining table where food was piled high, and laughter echoed through the hall. Can you imagine that going to a dinner in a suit of armor so heavy you could barely sit down? It sounds absurd, but for knights it was the norm. Now, you might be wondering, why? Why go through all this trouble? Why put yourself through hours of discomfort for something as mundane as a meal or a parade? The answer is simple, but no less ridiculous. It was about status. Being a knight was about projecting strength, and part of that meant putting on the armor, even if it wasn't strictly necessary. It wasn't just about protecting yourself from enemies. It was about showing off the fact that you could afford to have an entire wardrobe of metal, and that you were willing to wear it wherever you went. Historians still debate whether these extravagant displays were for military purposes or just for status. But the fact remains, knights weren't just dressing for battle, they were dressing to impress. Think of it like wearing a ridiculously expensive suit to a meeting where no one's paying attention to your clothes, but you still feel the need to wear it. Only instead of a sharp suit, knights were rocking 30 pounds of metal, and they did it not just to look good, but to embody the ideal of chivalry, an ideal that, let's be honest, was far less practical than it was glamorous. Imagine trying to sit at a table while wearing full armor. You can't exactly lean forward and take a bite of roast chicken without it feeling like a Herculean task. It's not like you can take off your helmet every time you want to eat or drink. No, you're stuck in it like some medieval prisoner of fashion. You're probably wondering how they managed to eat at all. And the truth is, most of them didn't. They'd end up nibbling on their food like birds trying to get a little bite between the metal plates, all while balancing in an uncomfortable position. The absurdity of it all just adds to the charm of the medieval knight's daily life. And let's not forget about the polishing. Oh, yes, they didn't just wear their armor, they had to make sure it was spotless. Can you imagine spending hours upon hours polishing every inch of your gear, only to walk into a banquet hall and have someone spill wine on your chest plate? It was a cycle of endless maintenance, like a metaphorical hamster wheel where knights never stopped cleaning and adjusting their gear, all in preparation for moments that were less about actual warfare and more about performance. So much for rest, huh? If anything, you have to admire the sheer dedication to unnecessary preparation that knights embodied. There's a strange beauty in how seriously they took the practice of donning and perfecting their armor, even if it was mostly for show. But at the same time, it's also kind of a tragic comedy. A whole society of men wearing the most uncomfortable outfits imaginable, all just to look like they were prepared for a battle that, in most cases, would never come. As you stand there, surrounded by the echoes of your footsteps, you can't help but chuckle at the sheer absurdity of it all. Yet somehow, in the thick of it, you begin to understand why they did it. It wasn't just about the battle, it was about something bigger. Something that no matter how uncomfortable or impractical knights felt was worth enduring. And that, in its own strange way, is kind of comforting, isn't it? You take another step, your boots echoing through the cold stone corridor. The hall feels endless, and you start to wonder if there's any end in sight. But as you move deeper into the castle, you can't help but think about something even more absurd than your own heavy armor, the endless polishing. Yes, it wasn't enough that knights had to wear armor that weighed as much as a small car. They also had to keep it gleaming, polishing, scrubbing, buffing. It was a never-ending process. Just imagine spending your day not in battle, but meticulously wiping down every inch of your armor, making sure every plate was shiny, every piece of metal glimmering in the light. What was the point? Was anyone even going to notice the gleam of your breastplate when you were about to head into battle? Or when you were just going to the king's banquet? But that's the thing with knights. They had to look perfect. Historians still argue whether knights genuinely needed all that polish for practical purposes, or if it was simply another form of vanity, a way to show off how well maintained they were. Sure, there's some historical basis for the notion that the shiny armor could have been reflective, potentially offering protection from certain types of weapons, or blinding opponents with the glare. But let's be real, more often than not, knights were polishing their armor in the peace and quiet of their castles, not fighting a war. The act of polishing was almost like an obsessive ritual, a way to feel like they were doing something productive, when in reality, they were just wasting time in a cold stone room. Imagine, if you will, a knight with nothing to do but sit in his cold chamber, holding a cloth in his hand as he buffs the surface of his armor. There's no battle to prepare for, no enemies in sight, just the soft rhythmic motion of polishing, the quiet sound of cloth against steel. Hours and hours spent making sure every inch of the suit was flawless. It's almost meditative, but also a little bit soul-crushing, don't you think? You could imagine that at least half of the time the knight probably wasn't even looking at the armor. He was just staring out the window, daydreaming of something better than the routine of endless maintenance. But here's the kicker. When knights weren't busy polishing, they were often just sitting around waiting for a battle, waiting for an invitation to a feast, waiting for anything that required them to actually get us out of the castle and do something useful. But for most knights, that didn't happen all that often. A few battles here and there, maybe some jousting tournaments or parades, but a lot of time was spent just existing in armor, waiting in the background, looking impressive, but not actually doing anything. It's like showing up to a concert dressed to the nines, only to realize the band hasn't even started playing yet. You stand there in your finest clothes, uncomfortable, awkward, waiting for something to happen that might make it all worthwhile. And the worst part, even when knights weren't sitting in their chambers polishing armor, they were still trying to look the part, always performing, always maintaining an image. The armor became their identity. The shimmering plates, the polished gauntlets, the gleaming breastplate. It wasn't just armor, it was a representation, a symbol. The knight, cloaked in metal, was a symbol of honor, strength, and courage. But in reality, what did that symbol mean? Most of the time, it just meant that you spent a lot of time getting dressed and a lot more time cleaning your gear. Let's pause for a second and think about the real cost of all this. What did it take to maintain all that metal? Well, it didn't just require elbow grease. It required an entire team of squires, blacksmiths, and armorers who worked tirelessly to make sure that a knight's armor remained in pristine condition. Imagine the effort it took for these knights to not only wear the armor, but to ensure that it was ready to go at a moment's notice. It was a full-time job, and that job often had very little payoff. Because the truth is, knights spent more time polishing their armor than they did wearing it into battle. They spent more time ensuring they were immaculate than actually fighting for the honor they were supposedly representing. You could compare this endless cycle of preparation and maintenance to someone who spends all their free time perfecting their appearance for an event that never actually happens. It's like buying a tuxedo and obsessively pressing the seams only to realize that the gala was canceled. Yet knights stubborn honor-bound as they were kept up the ritual. Every day they polished their armor. Every day they made sure they were prepared for the unknown. And as they worked, the armor became less of a practical tool and more of a statement. It wasn't about functionality. It was about looking the part. You had to be seen as a knight, not just be one. Historians still debate the purpose of all this effort. Was it simply about protecting yourself on the battlefield? Or was it a way to ensure that the knight looked like a knight, even if he wasn't actually doing anything knightly? Some scholars argue that the continuous upkeep of armor was a symbol of the knight's dedication to his role, a way of showing the world that he was always prepared to defend honor and duty, even if he was stuck polishing his breastplate all day. But the real question is, was it worth it? Was the armor truly a tool of warfare? Or was it more like the medieval equivalent of a flashy outfit you wear just to say, "Look at me, I'm important"? By the time you finish this mental journey through the castle halls, you can almost feel the hours stretch out before you, each one spent bent over, polishing the plates and making sure every scratch was buffed out. It's a lonely, laborious process, and you start to imagine what it would be like if you had the luxury of stepping away from it. But no, there's no escaping the armor. It's with you all the time. Every movement you make is accompanied by the metallic echo of your own armor. And still, there's no battle, there's no action, just hours of preparation for something that might happen, or, more often than not, never happens at all. And here you are in the heart of the castle, surrounded by polished metal, waiting. You're dressed for war, but the war hasn't come. The banquet is about to begin, and all you can think about is how much you'd rather be in something more comfortable, like, well, anything else. But alas, the knight's life is a life of preparation, and you must stand proud in your shining armor, even if that means spending most of your time polishing the metal rather than fighting any dragons. The banquet hall is an imposing sight, lit by rows of flickering candles and filled with the rich, mouth-watering scent of roast meats and freshly baked bread. The long wooden tables are adorned with fine tapestries, and knights and nobles mingle in their finery, their voices echoing off the stone walls. It should be a grand affair, after all. Royal dinners are the sort of occasions where one's social status is on full display. But there's a catch. You, my friend, are about to attend this glorious feast in full armor. That's right. Every last plate of metal, every gauntlet, every helmet. All of it. Now let's pause here and appreciate the absurdity of the situation. Can you imagine putting on 60 pounds of metal just to attend a dinner party? You're standing there in your heavy suit of armor, watching people effortlessly pick up goblets of wine and savor their roast boar, while you're over there wondering how in the world you're going to manage even breathing without suffocating in your full suit. This isn't an evening of relaxation. It's a battle against comfort itself. But here's the thing. The knights didn't have to wear armor to a feast. It wasn't like there was a royal decree that said all knights must attend feasts in their full battle gear, no exceptions. No knights wore their armor because, much like today's Instagram influencers, they felt the need to put on a show. It was about image, about making a statement that they were ready for anything, even if anything was just sitting at a table, eating bread. Historians still argue whether this was more about tradition or about creating an intimidating aura. Maybe knights felt that if they weren't seen in their armor, they would be overlooked, forgotten, unimportant. If they didn't wear their shining plate, then perhaps their worth would be diminished in the eyes of their peers. But really, let's be honest here. Can you imagine trying to enjoy a nice dinner when your helmet is cutting off your hearing and making it impossible to even look at your plate without tilting your head at an odd angle. So there you are, standing in the middle of the feast, trying not to knock over anyone's goblet with the side of your helmet, struggling to take a bite of your food. The armor may protect you from an enemy's sword, but it does nothing for your ability to pick up a piece of roast turkey. It's like trying to eat a 5-course meal while wearing an oversized diving suit. You can't see much, you can't hear much, and you can't breathe properly. But hey, at least you look impressive. What's most comical about all this is how impractical it all is. You're expected to move gracefully, to engage in conversation, to appear dignified, while you're sitting there sweating profusely inside a metal suit, practically unable to lift your arm to grab your wine. The only thing you're really good at in this scenario is standing still and looking important. The idea of socializing in your armor becomes a ridiculous game of trying to engage with others without having a full-on meltdown in your metal prison. It's like going to brunch in a suit of kettlebells. Your friends might compliment you on your bold choice of attire, but you're the one left sweating through the ordeal, wishing you could just sit down and relax for a second, and forget about the whole sitting down part altogether. Unless you've got the flexibility of an Olympic gymnast, sitting down in full armor is a nightmare. You're more likely to topple over than actually take a seat. So instead, you stand looking regal and stiff, hoping that no one notices that you can't even bend your knees properly. And yet somehow, the knights were expected to endure this. Not just endure it, but to enjoy it. The royal feasts were events of prestige occasions for knights to demonstrate their status, to show that they were not only skilled in battle, but also in courtly behavior. And this courtly behavior included knowing how to wear your armor at the most inconvenient of times. Perhaps it was less about practicality and more about presenting yourself as a paragon of chivalry, someone who could be depended on to show up, stand tall, and if necessary, fight. Because, let's face it, no one's going to take you seriously as a knight if you're not wearing your armor, even if you're just sitting at the table eating pheasant. Historians still debate the true reasons behind this tradition. Some say it was simply the knightly code, the concept of always being ready for battle regardless of the situation. Others argue it was a social pressure, an unspoken rule that required knights to wear their armor at all times in order to maintain their reputation. Whether out of tradition, practicality, or sheer peer pressure, knights couldn't escape their metal shell. Even when the stakes weren't high, even when there was no enemy to face, the armor was still on like a second skin, never to be taken off for too long. But there is something oddly comforting about it, isn't there? The idea that knights were willing to endure such discomfort just to maintain a certain image of honor and strength. It's a little like how we in the modern world sometimes wear uncomfortable clothing for the sake of looking good. Think about the high heels you wear to that one event, even though you know you'll regret it by the end of the night. Or the perfectly tailored suit that feels a little too tight in the waist, but makes you look sharp. Sure, you might be physically uncomfortable, but at least you're seen. And for knights, that was the key, to be seen as powerful, as strong, as ready for anything, even if anything was a dull evening at the royal feast, surrounded by food that you could barely eat and conversations you could hardly hear. You can almost hear the knights in the corner of the hall grumbling to themselves as they try to get comfortable in their armor, wishing for a soft chair and a cold drink, but knowing they must endure. But at least they know they're impressing someone, whether that be the king, their fellow knights, or the ladies who would come by and admire their gleaming suits of armor. There was something powerful about that, something that made all the discomfort worth it. After all, who wouldn't want to be seen as a paragon of knightly virtues, even if that meant not being able to sit down without making a scene? So as the feast rages on around you, you stand tall, your body aching under the weight of the armor, but your pride standing strong, as solid as the metal encasing your body. And you begin to realize that just like the knights of old, it's all about the performance. You might be uncomfortable, sure, but in this moment, you are the knight, the shining example. Even if it's just for one night, your armor is a symbol of your place in the world, a place where honor is measured not by your ability to sit or eat, but by your willingness to endure. Now, let's take a step back from the banquet and imagine something a little more practical, the battle. You know, the kind of moment knights were supposedly preparing for when they spent hours polishing their armor and trudging through those royal feasts weighed down by their gear. This is where the armor was supposed to shine. But funny enough, even in battle, the armor wasn't all that practical. In fact, the most effective battles didn't always involve knights in full-plate armor. The real warriors were those who could move quickly, stay light on their feet, and avoid the heavy clunk of their armor dragging them down. But of course, knights didn't just hang out in armor all day because it was practical. They wore it because they had to, because the whole point of being a knight was to always be prepared for battle. That meant constantly having to wear your armor, even when the chances of actually needing it were slim to none. After all, what good was being a knight if you weren't fully equipped and ready to face any challenge? So it wasn't just about actual combat. It was about maintaining the image of a knight who was always on guard, ready for the next skirmish, even if it never came. And then there's the whole issue of the weight. You've already felt what it's like to move in this heavy gear while attending a feast, but imagine trying to actually fight in it. The armor that had been painstakingly designed to protect you on the battlefield ends up becoming more of a hindrance than a help. Every swing of your sword is heavier, every step slower, every move requires more effort, and after a while, the weight of it all begins to feel like an oppressive force, dragging you down into exhaustion. The weight of your armor is so intense, so overwhelming, that you're not even sure how long you could last in a real battle. Maybe you've had to stand for hours at the king's feast with no chair in sight, trying not to pass out from the sheer discomfort. Maybe you've already started sweating in your armor as the heavy layers trap the heat and make every movement feel like it's a struggle. And that's just standing still. Now, imagine trying to fight while encased in all that metal. It sounds exhausting, doesn't it? Historians still argue over how effective knights truly were in full armor during battle. Some point to the fact that knights were the heavy cavalry, perfect for charging headfirst into the enemy, smashing through ranks with sheer force. Others suggest that knights, weighed down by their armor, were actually far less mobile than they should have been, and could easily be overwhelmed by faster, lighter forces. But one thing's for sure, knights didn't just wear their armor for practicality. They wore it because it was expected. It was part of the knightly persona, the image of invincibility that had to be maintained at all costs. And that meant a lot of extra weight that didn't always translate into effectiveness on the battlefield. Can you imagine trying to fight a battle where you can't even see clearly, can't breathe properly, and your every movement feels like you're trapped in a metal cage? The visual of a knight swinging a sword, barely able to move, while the heavy weight of his armor drags him down, seems almost comical. And that's not even taking into account the other limitations of the armor, like the limited range of vision and the deafening silence from the muffling of sound. If knights really had to fight in this gear day in and day out, it would have been an exhausting, overwhelming experience. But again, knights didn't exactly do much fighting in their armor. The reality is that most knights spent their time waiting for the next battle that might never come. Most of their existence was spent practicing, maintaining, and looking the part. In fact, battles themselves were far fewer and farther between than one might imagine. The vast majority of knights spent their time simply walking through the halls of the castle, performing ceremonial duties or attending social functions in their armor, making sure they looked the part of the battle-ready warrior, even when there was no battle to fight. So what did they do when there was no war? Well, a lot of them waited. They waited for the king to call them into battle, or for the next tournament, or for a rival knight to challenge them. But more often than not, knights found themselves sitting idle in their armor, unable to do much of anything except adjust their gear or polish their swords. These idle moments were part of the knight's life, but they were also a testament to how unrealistic the whole knightly existence really was. There's something deeply ironic about spending all your time preparing for something that may never actually happen. It's like those times when you obsessively plan for a vacation that never comes. You spend hours organizing your bags, making sure you have everything just right, and then you don't even go. The mental energy spent preparing for something that doesn't materialize is almost comical in its futility. And that's exactly what life as a knight often felt like. Constant preparation, constant readiness for battle, but never actually using the skills or the gear that you've spent so much time on. For most knights, the actual battles were few and far between. Can you imagine what that would feel like? The crushing weight of all that armor, the sense that you're always on but never actually getting to prove it. You're like a high-performance sports car sitting in a garage, always polished, always ready to go, but never actually taken out for a drive. The contrast between the reality of a knight's life filled with waiting and preparation and the imagined glory of battle is both absurd and fascinating. The armor itself became a trap of sorts, a barrier between knights and the world around them. While it protected them on the battlefield, it also kept them isolated from their own bodies and their surroundings. It became a prison, a metaphor for the medieval world that demanded knights constantly remain ready for action, even when action wasn't happening. The irony here is palpable. The more they wore the armor, the less freedom they had. But here's the truth. The knights didn't get to complain. They couldn't take off their armor in the middle of a banquet or skip polishing their breastplate just because they were feeling lazy. The expectation was clear. They were warriors, always. There was no escape from the weight of that armor, no reprieve from the mental and physical toll it took to wear it. And so the cycle continued. They wore their armor for the king's feasts, for tournaments, for daily routines. They spent hours getting dressed, maintaining their gear, and waiting for something, anything that would justify it all. And through it all, they never lost sight of their true purpose to look like a knight. Even when the battle was nowhere in sight, the armor had to be on. And that, as much as anything, was the reality of being a knight. Now, picture this. You've been trudging through the castle for what feels like days, locked in your armor, barely able to move your muscles, aching under the weight. You've sat through the royal banquet awkwardly, sipping wine while pretending to be comfortable. And you've polished your armor until it's practically glowing. You've battled with the discomfort, tried to navigate a life where everything from eating to sitting to standing has to be carefully planned to avoid knocking something over with your gigantic metal body. But here's the kicker. Even all of this, the physical discomfort, the tedious upkeep, was just a small part of the nightly burden. Because the real weight, the one you can't even see, is something called honor. Knights didn't just wear their armor to battle or to feasts. They wore it because they were bound by the code of chivalry. It wasn't just about being ready to fight. It was about being ready to live up to an ideal, to a set of rules that governed everything they did. This code demanded loyalty, bravery, courtesy, and a whole host of other virtues that were supposed to make them paragons of virtue. But as we know by now, it wasn't just about virtue. It was about appearance. Imagine having to live your life according to a set of rules that required you to be perfect at every turn. Not just in battle, but in every interaction, every gesture, every moment of your day. You couldn't just be a knight. You had to be the perfect knight, one who was always seen as noble, upright, and unshakable. That's a heavy burden to carry. And it wasn't just a mental burden, it was an emotional one, too. Historians still argue about how strictly the code of chivalry was adhered to, and how much of it was symbolic rather than a real day-to-day influence. Some scholars argue that the code was more about creating an idealized image, one that knights could aspire to, but often failed to achieve. Others suggest that knights truly believed in their sacred duty and lived their lives accordingly. Either way, the code was something that added a whole extra layer of weight to the life of a knight, one that was entirely invisible, but often felt more intensely than the armor they wore. Can you imagine what it would feel like to have your every action scrutinized under the microscope of honor? Every time you spoke to a lady, every time you greeted another knight, every time you sat down to a meal. It all had to be perfect. You couldn't afford to show weakness or discomfort, not even for a second. And this wasn't just about appearances, it was about guilt. If you didn't live up to the ideals of the code, you were seen as a failure. If you didn't wear your armor to the banquet, if you didn't maintain your equipment in top condition, you were perceived as less of a knight. Even the smallest slip-up could be seen as dishonorable, and for a knight, dishonor was worse than death. The psychological toll this took on the knights was immense. They were expected to embody a way of life that was nearly impossible to maintain consistently. You could almost imagine the constant pressure of living up to the chivalric ideals, the unrelenting expectation to be a perfect warrior, perfect servant, perfect gentleman, all at the same time. It's like trying to juggle a dozen flaming swords while balancing on a tightrope, never once allowing the fire to singe your armor or your dignity. The pressure must have been exhausting, and yet they continued. Why? Because they had to. Their entire identity was wrapped up in this performance. Now, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever felt the weight of an unspoken expectation on you? The pressure of having to be perfect all the time? It's like trying to be a good student, a good friend, a good partner, all while managing your own personal struggles. But imagine that pressure multiplied by 1,000 and dressed in 60 pounds of metal. The weight of that constant performance was more than just physical. It seeped into every part of a knight's life, from their social interactions to their internal thoughts. The armor they wore wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was a constant reminder of the ideal they were striving toward, even if it often felt out of reach. The knight's life wasn't just about winning battles, it was about being a knight. and that required more than just skill with a sword. It required a kind of relentless perfectionism that didn't allow for failure. When knights weren't at war, they were on the front lines of a different battle, the battle to maintain their honor. This internal struggle might have been more exhausting than the physical battle itself, and this mental burden often led knights into paradoxical situations. While they were meant to protect the weak and act with integrity, the reality was often far messier. Knights could be just as flawed, just as human as anyone else. The constant pressure to maintain the image of perfection often led to moments of inner conflict where knights would wrestle with their own desires, fears, and weaknesses, all while putting on the act of the perfect, unflappable warrior. Take, for instance, the endless tournaments knights would participate in. Sure, jousting might have been thrilling, and winning a tournament would earn you glory and prestige. But at what cost? The pressure to succeed at all costs could lead to dangerous behavior, whether on the field or in their personal lives. Knights who were caught up in their own performances might have become obsessed with winning, with proving their strength, with maintaining their reputation. And this obsession could easily spiral into reckless behavior. We see the same in modern society, don't we? People who put too much stock in their public image often end up sacrificing their happiness and peace of mind for the sake of their appearance. Historians still debate how knights managed the constant push and pull between their ideals and their human imperfections. Some suggest that the knights who did the best were those who could find a balance between living up to the code and acknowledging their own humanity. Others argue that the most famous knights, the ones whose names have been immortalized in stories, were those who could maintain the facade of perfection, even when their inner struggles threatened to break through. But for the average knight, the life of chivalry was a constant tug-of-war. No matter how hard they tried to live up to the code, no matter how perfectly they polished their armor or tended royal feasts, there was always a lingering doubt, was I good enough? And when there wasn't a battle to fight, this doubt became their fiercest enemy. It's easy to look at these knights from a distance and imagine their lives as grand and heroic. They had all the status, all the glory, all the respect. But when you really dig deeper, when you peel back the layers of armor and shine, you see the struggle they faced on the inside. Being a knight wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about fighting an internal war, one where every move, every decision, every action was weighed against the ideals of honor and chivalry. And that, in the end, may have been the heaviest burden of all. Now that we've peeled back the layers of the knight's armor, both literally and figuratively, let's take a moment to step out of the past and into the present day for a brief, slightly humorous parallel. You see, the absurdity of the medieval knight's life wasn't just a quirk of their time. It's something that in some strange way we still experience today. Sure, we're not walking around in 60 pounds of metal, though that would make for a very interesting day at brunch. But we do wear our own metaphorical armor. We dress up for jobs, for events, for family gatherings, all in an attempt to project an image of success, strength, or importance. And much like those knights, we often find ourselves trapped in the weight of this armor, unable to move freely, and sometimes, just sometimes, feeling like we can't breathe. Picture it, you're getting ready for a big meeting at work, or a dinner with people you really want to impress. You spend hours picking out the perfect outfit, the right shoes, the right accessories. When you look in the mirror, you see a version of yourself that looks polished, confident, ready to take on the world. But underneath that polished surface, there's a little bit of discomfort. Maybe your tie is too tight, your shoes are pinching, or your waistband is doing you no favors. But you soldier on because the expectation is clear. You must look perfect, even if you're dying inside from the constriction of your armor. Isn't that just the modern-day version of the knight's dilemma? Much like the knights of old, we too are bound by the armor of social expectations. We have to look sharp, act sharp, and most of all, maintain the image of someone who has it all together, even when we're feeling more like a disjointed puppet in a stiff suit. It's not about comfort. It's about image. It's about being seen in a certain way. So we wear our armor as we step out into the world, pretending that we're impervious to the discomfort it causes, all while knowing deep down that we'd probably rather be in something much more comfortable. But as much as we can laugh at the idea of wearing an iron suit to a royal dinner, there's a certain absurdity in this, isn't there? Why do we spend so much time, energy, and money crafting these personas, whether it's the knight in shining armor or the corporate worker in a finely tailored suit, when in truth we're all just people trying to navigate the world the best we can? It's almost as if we've all been trained, just like those knights, to put on a show, to maintain the image of strength and poise, even when the reality is a little less graceful. This obsession with appearance, with looking the part, is still with us today, even though we don't have to wear metal and march into battle. We wear our own armor in the form of clothes, social media posts, and professional achievements, always presenting the most polished version of ourselves. It's a performance, just like the knights' lives were a performance where we show the world that we're ready for whatever comes, even when we might feel like we're just waiting for the battle to happen. And here's the thing, we also spend a lot of time maintaining our metaphorical armor just like the knights maintain theirs. How much time do we spend on appearance, whether it's grooming, dressing, posting the right pictures on social media, or making sure our public persona aligns with how we want to be perceived? Sure, we don't have to polish every inch of our outfits, thankfully, but we do invest a lot of energy in making sure we appear successful, comfortable, and in control. It's a bit like the knight polishing his sword, ensuring that it looks pristine and ready for battle even if he never has to draw it. Historians still debate whether knights actually needed all that armor in battle. Some suggest that knights may have been better off with lighter, more flexible armor that allowed for greater mobility. After all, the heavy plate was designed for an age when combat involved a lot of close-quarter fighting, where protection was paramount. But the reality of the knight's armor wasn't just about practicality, it was about visibility. Armor wasn't just functional, it was meant to be seen. It was meant to convey status, strength, and invincibility. And that's where we see the real connection to today's society. It's not just about how well we do things, it's about how others perceive us doing those things. It's about creating a narrative that others can believe in whether or not it's based on reality. Now, think about how we present ourselves online. The pressure to maintain a certain image on social media, whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook, is immense. We carefully craft our posts, edit our photos, curate our feed, always trying to present the best version of ourselves. Sound familiar? It's not that different from a knight polishing his armor in preparation for the next tournament or feast. We want to be seen in the best light possible. We want to look like we have it all together, even if underneath the surface we're just as uncomfortable in our metaphorical armor as those knights were in their actual plate. But here's where the modern comparison really hits home. Knights didn't just wear their armor because they needed it. They wore it because they had to. There was a certain social pressure to maintain the appearance of invincibility. The armor wasn't just about protection, it was about reputation. And while we might not be walking around in iron suits, we're certainly walking around in our own versions of armor, carefully crafted to make sure that no one can see the cracks underneath. The illusion of perfection is something we all chase, even if we can't always sustain it. In a way, we all still live under the shadow of the same expectations knights did. We're expected to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way. Whether it's in the boardroom or on Instagram, we're putting on armor. The only difference is that today's armor is a little more comfortable, though still uncomfortable in its own ways. But the weight of it is just as real. The mental exhaustion of trying to maintain a polished persona, of performing in front of others, is something that I think we can all relate to, no matter where we live or what time period we come from. The truth is, no matter how shiny or polished the armor may look, it's still a suit of metal, and at the end of the day, we all need a break from it. Whether it's taking off our suits or logging off social media, we need to find moments where we can step out of the performance and just be. Just like those knights probably longed for a moment of peace outside their heavy suits, we all need moments where we're not constantly performing. Maybe that's the greatest lesson we can learn from their experience. Sometimes it's okay to take off the armor and just rest. As the echoes of clanking armor fade into the distance, and the grand, shining halls of the castle begin to blur, in your mind, you feel the weight of the metal start to lift bit by bit. The heavy breathlessness of the knight's life, the constant struggle, the endless polishing, the pursuit of perfection begins to fade like a soft whisper in the wind. The grand feast, the tournaments, the long corridors lined with swords and shields all start to slip away as if the memories themselves are taking a quiet rest. Imagine now the quiet. After all of it, the stillness that follows when the armor is finally set down. When the long, tiring march through the stone halls is no longer a part of your world. It's just you now. Just the soft hum of your breath and the gentle rhythm of your heartbeat, as if everything has slowed to a pace that allows you to be. There's a comfort in knowing that much like those knights, we too can take off our own metaphorical armor. We can rest free from the weight of expectations and the pressure to perform. There's nothing to prove here, no armor to polish, no battles to fight. Just quiet, just peace. As the quiet deepens, you feel the softness of the world surrounding you. The weight of armor, both literal and figurative, fades to a distant memory, and you can let go of everything. All the performance, all the striving for perfection, slowly drifts away. In this moment, you are free from the clank of metal, the expectations, the endless polishing. You are simply here with nothing more to do, no more weight to carry. So take a deep breath. Let the quiet fill you and allow yourself to rest. Let go of the weight and drift softly into peaceful sleep, free and unburdened. Good night.